They say the Berlin Wall fell on accident. It was the result of a muddled press conference, a misread statement, a bureaucratic slip that unraveled for decades of Cold War tension. But I ask you, what empire collapses because a clerk misspoke? What border surrenders because a journalist raised his hand? No, the truth lies deeper buried under concrete and blood, in a room lit by one flickering bulb, where a single man once stared through a glass pane, watching a city he could never touch again. His name was Konrad Wexler, though few remember it now. Schabowski didn't know Konrad. He only knew the envelope was marked urgent and bore the seal of the Central Committee. Inside was a forged memo, carefully worded, deceptively simple. Officially, he was a mid-level communications officer for the East German Ministry of Information. In truth, Konrad was the ghost of a man who should have died in 1961, the day the wall went up, and yet continued walking, breathing, working, as if his life had not been cut in half like his city. The phrase had never existed. Every time someone tried to confirm it, the inquiry was redirected or buried. He paused, then uttered the words Konrad had crafted. It reached Schabowski the morning of November 9th. That night, during a routine press conference, a reporter asked, "When will the travel regulation come into effect?" Konrad invented it after studying decades of GDR lexicon. They were Konrad's bullet, fired through the veil of state control. Once spoken aloud, they couldn't be taken back. It sounded authentic, ambiguous, confusing, dangerous. He lived in Treptow, near the southern edge of the wall, in a crumbling apartment that once echoed with the laughter of a family that no longer existed. He knew the rhythms of East German news cycles, the way headlines were drafted in threes, the way directives were issued with triple redundancies to avoid confusion, except when someone made sure confusion was the goal. His wife, Marianne, had been across the river the night they closed the border. She never came back. He was the last person anyone would suspect of treason, but he had been writing. For 17 years, he kept a secret journal, coded, wrapped in brown paper, hidden behind a loose tile in the ministry's basement lavatory. Why would a forgotten man bring down a regime? It was not a diary, but a plan. It's a precise step-by-step guide for how to make a wall crumble, not by bombs, not by protest, but by language. His son Jakob, just 5 years old then, was taken in by her relatives in the West. Konrad tried everything: letters, petitions, bribes, but the system was airtight. He watched Jakob grow older only through smuggled Polaroids, blurred and grainy, passed to him by a janitor who cleaned the American embassy in Berlin's Lindorf. He had lost them, but never truly accepted it. By 1989, Konrad was 56 and invisible. He moved like smoke through government halls, a man who had learned to survive by becoming unremarkable. You see, Konrad understood the power of phrasing, of subtle bureaucratic sabotage. On October 7, 1989, the 40th anniversary of the GDR, he handed a classified envelope to Gunter Schabowski. Travel restrictions for citizens of the German Democratic Republic will be lifted under the authority of the new Mobility Accord. Effective immediately upon the formal authorization of border checkpoints, there was no Mobility Accord. For 3 days, the memo circulated silently. Nobody questioned its origin. Schabowski flipped through his notes, visibly confused. As far as I know, it goes into effect immediately. History would record this as a fluke, slip, but make no mistake, those words were loaded. But why? Because Konrad was not a traitor. He was a widower, a father, and his heart, like the city, had been divided too long. In the final days of the German Democratic Republic, the Ministry of Information no longer issued truth, it manufactured noise. Words became smoke, meaningless and thick, meant to disorient rather than guide. He knew every corridor, every failing wire, every guard who had stopped saluting him years ago. Something had gone wrong, or to right. Reports were conflicting. Citizens were gathering at border crossings, guards unsure whether to shoot or smile. His lips twitched with disbelief. "What is the Mobility Accord?" he hissed to no one in particular. The fax machine stuttered. Telephones rang but were never answered. Schabowski's words from the night before had spread like holy fire. People were chanting not slogans, but questions now. Here. Are we allowed? He wore a brown coat frayed at the cuffs, always buttoned to the throat, even in summer. Inside, taped against his chest, he carried the last photograph of Jakobaj 12. On a western beach, holding a dog Conrad had never met. The ministry building itself, gray, windowless, an old Nazi archive repurposed, had grown quiet. It's not in any directive from Moscow. I am sorry I did not burn my uniform. I am sorry I waited 17 years to act, and that when I did, I used paper instead of fire. Then in thousands of hands pressed against cold concrete, unsure whether they were breaking a law or a curse. Their commanding officer, Harold Jieger, stood with a trembling radio, receiving no orders. He glanced at his men boys in gray coats, rifles hanging limp. Then he looked at the crowd. Families, lovers, drunks, students, widows. But no one saw Conrad alone on a ministry balcony, watching through dust-caked glass. His hands gripped the railing. He did not cheer. He did not cry. His face, pale and cracked, looked almost disappointed, as though he had torn open a wound so long, festering it no longer bled, just sighed. Some were weeping, others laughing like children. One man held up a broken television with the word Freiheit scrawled across it in lipstick. But I have no strength left to destroy things loudly. I only know how to unravel them quietly, not in Central, not even in our dictionary. Past his empty desk. Except one. Entered the records room. Closed the door behind him. It's a mistake. It must be. Typewriters clicked like insects behind locked doors, and radios hummed songs no one sang. The line between conspiracy and accident, trembling like a thread. Fear had become ambient, a constant pressure like a low ceiling of storm clouds. Conrad Wexler moved through these halls as if underwater. On the morning of November 9th, the building was abuzz, but not in the usual way. In a side office, under yellow lighting, a man named Oberfeld, Conrad's superior, was reading the memo again. "If it's a mistake," he said softly, "it cannot be undone. It's not without admitting we've lost control." Conrad stood behind him, silent. "No such phrase exists," Oberfeld continued. And there it was. Conrad cleared his throat. Oberfeld turned, narrowed his eyes. "What are you implying?" But Conrad said nothing more. He merely walked away, down the corridor where portraits of party leaders hung in austere rows, each face more lifeless than the last. Behind one frame, he knew there was a small cavity, an old mail slot sealed decades before. It now contained the last page of his journal. It was not a manifesto. It was not even a plan. It was a confession written not for the world, for Jakob. "I am sorry I did not climb the wall." Meanwhile, outside, the wall did not fall. It dissolved. First in silence, then in whispers. Pick. By 6:53 p.m., the border guards at Bornholmer Strage were overwhelmed. And Jieger, against every protocol, simply opened the gate. This moment would become an image, a legend, a cornerstone of televised history. He returned inside. The ministry would be vacated 3 days later. When the archivists came to catalog what remained, they found every drawer neatly labeled, every cabinet locked. Inside it lay a single envelope, no name, no date. Only a phrase on the front, typed in perfect courier font. The wall did not fall, it was let go. The morning after the border opened, Berlin was not a city, it was a wound beginning to sing. Thousands crossed the checkpoints in stunned silence or drunken joy. Families embraced through steel, through disbelief. Musicians dragged battered pianos into no man's land. Someone set up a grill. Someone else handed out flowers like ammunition. The wall, gray and monstrous, became a canvas of color, each splash of paint a small act of rebellion against history itself. And yet Conrad Wexler did not move. He stood on the eastern bank of the Spree, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the bridge, where once, long ago, he had watched Marianne walk away into West Berlin, laughing, unaware that it would be the last moment they would ever share. Now, 3 decades later, the same path lay open and guarded. Beckoning and still, Conrad hesitated. The truth was this: his war had ended the moment he succeeded, and like many men built for war, he no longer knew how to live in peace. In the days that followed, the government collapsed like a tent in the rain. Files were burned. Officers defected. Stasi agents dyed their hair and disappeared into the very crowds they once surveyed. But Conrad, the architect of the unraveling, remained behind, haunting the emptied halls of the ministry like a shade too stubborn to pass on. His colleagues assumed he had left for the West. The guards believed he had gone into hiding. No one saw him board a train, or walk through a gate, or appear on Western news. For a man who had destroyed a wall, he had become less than a whisper. But there is one record unconfirmed, unofficial, that offers a sliver of what became of him. On November 12, 1989, a clerk at the hospital in East Berlin filed a handwritten note into the emergency log. It read, "Middle-aged male, unknown identity, is found unconscious near Brandenburg Gate. No ID, no injuries, heart arrhythmic." Repeating a single phrase, "He'll be taller now." The man was transferred to a psychiatric ward. He spoke rarely, ate little. In moments of lucidity, he would request ink and paper not to write letters, but to draw. Not landscapes, not portraits, but walls. Hundreds of them. Some were crude. Others impossibly detailed, blueprints of separation too perfect to be accidental. One nurse claimed he would sketch an entire checkpoint gate from memory in under 5 minutes, then rip it apart slowly, piece by piece, as if demolishing it by hand. He gave no name, and then one morning he vanished. No transfer, no discharge, no signature. Just a single object left on the windowsill of his room. A dog-eared photograph of a young boy on a beach, holding a stick like a sword. To this day, the hospital denies the record. The page is gone. The nurse, untraceable. But a journalist who investigated the case in 1994 noted something strange. In the margins of the emergency logbook for that date, someone had scribbled faintly in pencil. The wall was never about bricks. It was about forgetting. And Conrad, perhaps more than anyone, had remembered too much. It is said that every revolution buries its ghosts, but some linger, unfinished. In back alleys of Berlin, there are whispers of an old man who walks with no destination, who stops at graffiti-covered remnants of the wall and stares not at the colors, but the cracks, listening, as if for footsteps on the other side. No one can say with certainty who he is, but once, in 2011, a tourist found something wedged into a broken slab near Mauer Park. A folded note, yellowed with age, typed in German, unsigned. It said, "My son is free now. That is enough. Do not need to be." The Berlin Wall is gone now. Its bones lie scattered across the earth chunks, sold to tourists, to museums, to art collectors who never felt the cold shadow it once cast. 1,000 souvenirs, each one whispering a different version of the same lie, that it ended cleanly, that it fell with joy, that no ghosts were left behind. But history does not fall. It decays. It rots from within, quietly, while we sing its praises. In the years that followed 1989, the official narrative hardened. Textbooks simplified it. Politicians sanctified it. They pointed to Schabowski's press conference and said, "This was the moment," called it spontaneous, unplanned, the will of the people breaking through decades of oppression like water through stone. And perhaps some of that is true, but not all. Nowhere in those retellings is Conrad Wexler mentioned. Nowhere is the phrase mobility accord examined, the forged memo, the silent sabotage, the long deliberate unraveling all erased, not out of malice, but convenience. Because a clean ending is easier to digest. Because a hero with no name makes a poor statue. But not all traces can be scrubbed. In 2019, on the 30th anniversary of the wall's fall, a scholar from Leipzig University was digitizing declassified GDR communication logs when she noticed a formatting anomaly in a fax sent to Schabowski's office on November 7, 1989. It contained the Mobility Accord memo. No authorship, no stamp. But embedded in the document's footer, almost invisible, was a single word repeated in microtext. Inkrunzong. It wasn't a term used by the GDR, it was private, personal, signal perhaps, left by its creator not for the party, but for the future. A whisper that said, "Someone did this. Someone meant this." So the scholar traced it back to a typewriter model only used in the ministry's basement offices. She requested personnel records. Most had been destroyed, except one weather-stained, to complete a listing of communications clerks from 1987. The last name on the list, nearly illegible, was Wexler. K. She filed a report. No response. 2 months later, she was reassigned. The file was never published, because the truth is this: for all our talk of transparency, we choose the truths we elevate. We preserve the ones that make us feel brave. We discard the ones that suggest a quieter horror, that the world can change not through grandeur, but through grief, through loss. Through a single man with nothing left to lose, choosing to pull a single thread, knowing it would all come undone. Conrad Wexler was not a revolutionary. He was not a hero. He was not even a name most people remember. But in the empty hours of those November nights, it was his silence that echoed loudest. It was his grief that folded the wall in upon itself. And perhaps that is why he never crossed. Because for men like him, the wall was never just concrete. It was memory. It was mourning. It was the shape of something that had once been whole and never would be again.